Hey everybody, thank you for joining. Hi Itama, hi Benny, hi Vitali, hi Daffy. Thank you so much for joining. Let's just wait for like more people to join in, then we will kickstart for like let's just wait for 1 more minute. Okay, so let's just get started.
Okay. I see people are testing the emoji responses here. This is cool. Welcome everyone for another episode of our Twitter Spaces series. As always, we have a special guest, and as always, we're going to say this is a special guest. Hello to Erez Dickman, SVP of Engineering at Lemonade. Erez, you want to say a few words? Tell us about yourself.
While Ez is trying to speak, I will just quickly give a rundown of what this show is about and what Wilco is about. Hi everybody, thank you so much for joining another episode of Tech Lead. My name is Shedrak Akintayo, and I am the Developer Relations Manager at Wilco, and also your host. Let's say your co-host. If you are yet unfamiliar with Wilco's mission is to empower every developer, regardless of their background or skill level, to unlock their full potential. To do so, we've created what we call a flight simulator for developers, where engineers can experience real world scenarios that they will encounter in their workplace through game like quests. As I mentioned, or as unmentioned, this is the third episode of Tech Lead, our Twitter Space series, where each month we will interview a tech leader to discuss different topics technical team leads deal with on a daily. Without further ado, I want to welcome Lemonade SVP of R&D, Erez Dickman, and of course our CEO, Rico CEO on Freyond. Take it away on.
Thanks,
It was
Shadrach.
good to be here.
Hey, Liz. All right, we can hear you now.
Yeah, I was afraid maybe Elon is up to his things today.
He singled you out. But no, we are using this platform, and it's great that we can still use it, and hopefully we can use it for way longer. But it's great to be here today. And Erez, tell us a bit about yourself, and then we'll start diving into the topics that our listeners care about.
Sure. So I've been in tech for the past 20 years and so. Well, I'm really old. Um, so about a decade ago, I started my journey as an entrepreneur and I co-founded a startup that after a while was acquired by eBay. I spent some time at PayPal doing some grown-up things. And in the past almost 4 years, I've been going through a wild ride at Lemonade. And I was hoping to share some of my experiences and mostly mistakes growing the team from 20 people to roughly 200 people that we have today.
That's great. We love learning from other people's mistakes. We don't do it often enough. Um, did you get to work at PayPal during the Elon Musk days, or um, is Twitter your first first real impression of him?
No, I'm not that old. I'm really not that old, and I can say for a fact that I don't think Elon has any code left in the PayPal code base. At least nothing that I was exposed to.
Got it. Interesting. Now you made me wonder, going back to all the companies I worked for and whether there's still code left that I wrote in any of them. But that's not really interesting for listeners. What is interesting, like you said, is the ability to learn from your mistakes and hopefully from some of the things you got right too. Um, So you mentioned that Lemonade went up from 20 to 200 people, and that was over a span of how long?
That's about 3 years, but I'm talking
3 years.
specifically the engineering organization.
Yeah, of course. So
Yeah.
200 engineers, 20 engineers to 200 engineers in 3 years.
Hmm.
That's 10x growth. That is pretty wild.
Yeah.
And there are so many challenges that come with it, of course, but first and foremost, you have to find those 180 people. Even if no one left, you still have 180 people to hire. That's really challenging. And obviously, we can have an entire episode just about talent. But generally speaking, if you can say, what has changed from a talent acquisition perspective as you scaled? Because finding the first few team members is not the same as finding engineer number 182, right?
It's very different, I think. And I think finding talent is different, but also the type of talent that you're looking for really changes as you grow. And I think, first of all, I've been really fortunate to work with an amazing talent acquisition team. And I think for me and for many other people, the most healthy way to grow is to create an environment where the team is really passionate about the company, really believes about its long-term ambitions. And when people are happy, they reach out to their friends and invite them to join too. And I think up to this day, we have more than 50% of our hiring is coming from referrals. And it's not because we pull people in their shirt every day and say, "Hey, who can you bring into Lemonade?" It's because we have a culture of growing the team and making an impact is not just about shipping code or building a product, but it's also contributing to the human capital. Um, so I think initially when I joined Lemonade, we had a completely flat organization. Like I had 20 something people reporting directly to me, which was nice. Like for me personally, it was a way to get to know everyone and to spend time to understand the culture and the technology and the product and the business. Um, but as we grew and wanted to create some structure, it also opened the door to different type of talent, and we started being able to diverge into two paths, like one path for individual contributors and another for engineering managers. And it also unlocked some opportunities in terms of our talent acquisition efforts. And because at the beginning, when you start your company, you typically look for jacks of all trades, like those people where you can just put together in a room. The mission is very clear, the complexity is fairly low, the intensity is very high, so everybody does everything. If typically you don't have any titles, you don't have any levels, and the majority of companies people also engage with full stack activities. But as you grow, people start to specialize, and I think when people do specialize, it also opens your talent pool to new opportunities. And individuals with more experience, individuals look to go deeper rather than wider. Um, Not sure if it answers your question.
Yeah, it certainly does, and that 50% figure is pretty impressive. I have to say, building a 200 person team, with over 100 people from referrals. But a tough question about that when you have such a large part of your team coming in through referrals, aren't you afraid of, in a way, gatekeeping?
Hmm.
It's people bringing in their friends, and you stay within the same social circles. How do you open it up to new types of people?
I think it's a great question. I anticipated this question because it was something I was debating with myself along the way. And like one term that is not very mature in the Israeli ecosystem is diversity. Like, how do you create diversity in your team with all the benefit? It entails while still relying on friends of friends. But the truth is, when you start looking at these opportunities of engaging with your network, it's not necessarily that you bring people that are exactly like-minded or with the same experience. Like if I open my LinkedIn account, I, I have thousands and thousands of connections. It doesn't mean that each of those connections are coming from the same background or have the same type of superpowers. It just means that are people I can start a conversation with. So in order to capitalize on these referrals, we do a lot of activities. Like, for example, you can do um, um, like events where people just sit around the table and they open their LinkedIn account and they start looking for potential talent. And potential talent is within the context of what you're looking for. Like, for example, we have a particular project now that specifically uses graph databases. If you filter your network to people with experience in graph databases, it's going to be very narrow. So each project brings with it new type of talent. And with this 50% figure, you can also look at the flip side of the other 50% that come from sourcing and other activities. And I think it also talks about a different type of mix within your team. Like, I think as you grow the team and you start promoting individuals from within, you need to have a healthy balance between people who grew from within the organization and people that bring an outside perspective. And I think it's also true for those referrals.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So, we
By
tackled
the way,
the
just
people
sorry
asking.
to break you in the middle. Maybe just one interesting part, like when I moved from PayPal to Lemonade, I don't know why, but many people wanted to follow me to Lemonade. And I trust the amazing individuals that have worked with me along the way. Like, I really value their contribution. I love working with them, but each and every one of them went through the same candidate experience as the rest of the team, because I wanted for everyone to meet the same bar and not to have any bias based on my past experiences. And there were some people who weren't cultural fit because it takes a while to really understand what differs between different company. Like a certain individual that could flourish within a big corporate like PayPal doesn't necessarily benefit from a high growth startup like Lemonade.
Yeah, totally. And we're going to touch a lot about the differences between, the small startup and what happens after it scales. And, particularly people aren't necessarily, the people you need aren't necessarily the same people, both culturally and professionally. And you mentioned that about the jacks of all trades versus the people who specialize. But another risk that I've seen with, bringing on everyone from your previous work is that you don't want to create this closed culture, this closed group within the larger group. And, when you bring in a lot of people, like we are three founders that all came from WeWork. But one of the things we didn't want to do is get, a lot of WeWorkers on the team and create this inside culture that if you're not from it, you don't really, get the jokes and all of that, and you feel like an outsider. So I definitely hear you, not just about passing through the regular candidate experience, but also making sure that you don't have too many of them or too much of a density of them. But shifting from people to structure, which is still in the realm of people, but there's a certain structure that worked for you for 20, and obviously it wouldn't work for 200, and it's okay because no one should expect to have the same structure at 20 and at 200. But what were the stops along the way? When and how often do you find yourself making changes and telling the team, all right, this worked for us so far, but now we need to reorganize in a different way?
That's a great question, and I actually addressed that question in the first week when new folks onboard to the team. And I think one of the great things that Lemonade does is that we're really upfront about the fact that things are going to change and changes are going to be frequent. And we'd like everyone in the team to embrace those changes. And when you think about growth mindset, like, and you think about the experience of growing from 20 people to 200 people, it means everything changes around you. The tech stack changes, the hierarchy changes, the complexities within the team changes, the business dynamic changes, maybe the room that you're sitting in changes like every every few weeks. And for some people, it could be devastating. Like, it's really against their instincts. It's not the work environment that they're looking for. But for others who have a growth mindset, I think it's an amazing opportunity to grow and to develop. And so we place an emphasis on growth mindset and flexibility from the candidate experience, but because we want to be very transparent in terms of what we expect from people who join the team. So that's about expectations. Regarding the pace of change and the type of changes that we've made, I think from the get-go, our design for the organization has mostly focused on the smallest unit possible. And we said if we can scale that unit, everything else will work in tandem. And we decided to adopt the Spotify squad model. And I say it with caution because we changed and adapted it because we know that it doesn't really work in the same way that it worked at Spotify today. And even for Spotify, for the most part, it doesn't really work anymore. So we challenged a lot of the assumptions. And I think one of the things that I tell other people who come for advice based on our experience of growth, don't tailor your solution based on what you read in textbooks. Like, think about what you're trying to solve for, look for benchmarks and see whether they fit your philosophy. And for us, we wanted to create an organizational structure that empowers autonomy and ownership. And we wanted something that could last when we double the team, when we quadruple the team, and so forth. So the squad structure in tandem with objective and key results is something that we found to be very effective. So for those not familiar with the OKR model, it basically says that as a team, you define what's the main thing. These are the objectives, and you define how you measure success. These are the key results. And the great thing about it is that it creates clarity, but it also empowers the team to choose the work or the initiative that they're going to take on in order to make that impact. And if it works for a small team or a squad, it will also work once you scale into multiple squads and groups and so forth. So that was the design and the intent initially. And as we grew from 20 to 200 up until today, it still is the design, and I think it's working really effectively. But it also comes with its set of challenges, and feel free to stop me in the way if I'm talking too long about that particular topic. But I think one of the issues with squads is because you empower teams to ship features end to end and to become very independent, you start to create silos. People don't necessarily engage with other people within the organization. It's very difficult to create a strong standard professionally for front-end developers, for back-end developers. And it's really hard to grow as an organization from a professional standpoint. So at some point, we started to introduce guilds. There are some professional guilds that are really structured, like the front-end guild or the back-end guild, and there are some less structured guilds that are about user experience, security, and these type of things. But today in my team, I have a few architects or principal engineers that lead those guilds and set the North Star for the organization in terms of what it means to be a great craftsman or craftswoman at the organization. I can give a shameless plug for Shai Davidson podcast for my team recently. He's also one of the amazing people that came along from PayPal, but he recently talked about guilds at Lemonade and how to do it and what mistakes you should avoid. So I think squads in collaboration with guilds is a really scalable model that could work for 20 people and can also work for 1,000 people.
Cool. But even as you scale it, squads, at some point, you just have too many of them. And then you have to introduce some form of middle management or a hierarchy of squads or a collection of squads that in itself is,
Hmm.
sometimes they call it tribes or whatever.
Yeah.
When do you introduce those? How do you introduce those? How do you group them?
It's a good question. So basically, all of these organization structures are necessary. If we could live without any structure altogether and just live happily, like and freely, like, it would be best. Like I'm sure you would agree. But at some point, things break. I think for us, like when we started having like 4 or 5 different squads, like operating on separate domains, like it became pretty apparent that we need some top level organization to orchestrate everything that was going on. And it's also really critical for those engineering manager to have guidance and mentorship for someone who's a bit more senior, a bit more experienced. So I think when we scaled to about, I think, 50 people in the organization, we started to introduce tribes, which, by the way, I'm not sure it's the best name for various reasons, because you should probably call a thing what it means, and it means a group. And one of the reasons that it's called a tribe, that it also comes with the expectation that it has product leadership, engineering leadership, and also an architect, typically a staff engineer that works on the technical aspects of that group, but it still is a group of squads. So I think you should probably, the rule of thumb would be wait as much as you can until things start um, to really be difficult to manage, and then wait some more, and then make the change, because you really want to push the limits in terms of what's humanly possible, because you would be surprised, like if you think that you can manage something and you give it another 20%, typically you would see that the team has more capacity that you thought of originally. And if it's not the case, everyone would really be more welcoming of the change eventually, because they were really waiting for it to happen.
That's great advice. And we in software we always talk about premature optimization, but it really can be translated to org charts and human interactions as well. Premature optimization is not necessarily the right thing to do, and you always hear these stories about companies that have built them for scale from day one, but then you have to ask what was the price they had to pay
Yeah.
in the early days to get that scalable approach.
I think
Can you give us?
just to add one
Yeah.
more thing, like to make it more personal, when you think about the growth of a fast-paced organization, you would see some exceptional individuals moving from being an IC to a manager of managers within a few years, and that's not very natural. So you should ask yourself as a leader, like a few questions, and you should also have a few observations in mind. So the first of all, there is an inclination to always promote the people that are doing the best job. And if someone is doing the best job as an individual contributor, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best manager. It also doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the best job from their perspective. So the first thing that you should do is ask yourself, is this the right person for the job? And it doesn't mean you shouldn't take risks. It's okay to take risks, and it's also okay to roll back eventually, because it's the only way to grow. But still, sometimes when you grow the organization, you need to hire from outside in order to increase your uh, talent pool. And I think the second thing is, what you would see typically is with someone who spent their entire days developing and deploying to production and doing impact in the way that they perceive impact, they would feel useless after they would be promoted. Like, what am I doing? Like, how come I'm not really pushing to production changes all day? So I think it's really important to hold their hands and make sure that I understand what it means to make an impact in the organization, not just an individual contributor, but also as a leader, and the more senior you are, I think it's more complex to define how you make an impact.
That's a great point, and I think that as a company grows, you have both the individuals who are changing roles, and you need to walk them through the process and what it means to make an impact in their new role, but also the organization around them is changing, and they also need to learn how to make an impact in the organization. So these are like two dimensions in which everything is changing. And it brings me back to what you said in the beginning, where you want to hire people who have that growth mindset. And in a way, you can say that different companies might look for different types of skills or talents, and definitely even a single company might look for different types of people along its ride. But if there's one constant that you see in startups, regardless of where they are on their growth trajectory, is that they're always looking for people with a growth mindset. And maybe to bring you back to the talent conversation we had in the beginning, how do you screen for that? How do you know if the person in front of you has this growth mindset and can make that leap as the company grows?
I think it's a great question, and I don't think I can tell all of the secrets, but I think interviewing is a craft. Not everyone can be a great interviewer. And the subtleties of whether someone can have a flexible mindset is something that's difficult to gauge. And it's typically based on past experiences, but also on some nuances in the process. For example, you can talk about some of the recent changes that you've made in the team to give some context about how things are actually operating. And you would see an immediate response, whether it's positive or negative. You would see how much people are stressing whether they're going to join a particular team or join a different team. Like one of the things that you many times see is, not many times, but sometimes see in the interview process, is people and candidates who take a very long time to make a decision, like whether they want to join. Like they need to have another conversation and another conversation, and they keep debating, and all of these things are signals. Like by themselves, like they don't really make a distinction, but together they give you a lot of things to look at in order to gauge whether that person has a growth mindset. And I think with the level of talent that we typically interview in the ecosystem, it's also just great to be upfront and to say, hey, at Lemonade, things change constantly, and give examples like of things that change recently and what you expect to see in the future, and ask, how would you feel about that? And for the vast of great candidates, they would tell you the truth. Like they would say, like, I'm fine with this type of change, but like, I'm great with, this particular technology, but if it changes just in a bit, it's not for me. So you can get a lot of clues in terms of people's mindset from these type of discussions.
It's a great answer, and I really relate to what you said about the wanting to join a specific team versus wanting to join the company as an indicator. And I don't mean that if someone wants to join a specific team, they're necessarily not the right person for you, but it is an indicator that, along with other indicators, could be meaningful. And one of the things I always say to those types of candidates that say, I want to join that team, I always tell them, you know what, that's a request we might be able to accommodate, but keep in mind, it might not stay that way. Within 2 months, you might be in a different team, or the team might not exist anymore, and we might have a completely new structure. Do you still want to join the company? Knowing all of that, right? And, it's the combination of honesty on both sides, right? I'm honest with them about the changes that might happen, and then they're honest with me about how they'll react to it, like you said. And then, I can try to figure out if they're the right fit.
I also have an example from the product domain. Some conversation that's really common at Lemonade is that when we start working on a feature from a product perspective, 90% of the features don't reach production because they're either not like exactly what we wanted them to be, or eventually we decided to pivot to a different direction, or we decided to do it on mobile and not on web, or to do it via chatbot or API or these type of things. And some people can really be frustrated from these type of experiences. They're not bad people. They're not ungifted, but it's not for everyone. So I think the better you do a job of reflecting the realities of day to day, like the better job you do for the candidates to make sure that they join the company that fits their needs.
Yeah, I would say to the engineers listening to this, don't be attached to your code. I know it's frustrating when it doesn't make it to production or it gets deleted, uh, but hopefully someday you'll actually learn to appreciate deleted code and like it better than than code that still exists. Um, okay, so we found those people with a growth mindset. They joined in as person number 25 on the engineering team, and now the team is already 50 or 75 or 100, and they need to go through some process. They need to first of all onboard to the team initially at 25, but also in a way they need to onboard to that 75-person team, right? I mean, they have some of the historical baggage and culture, but it's also a very different team than the one they joined. Is there like a continuous onboarding that they go through, or is it periodical, or do you just assume that if they grew with the team, they know how it acts and what's the best way to navigate it?
It's a great question, and I'm sure that there's some room for improvement. But I think most people learn from experience, and they see the reality of the day to day. And I believe in continuous feedback. And a week passes by, a month passes by, the reality changes. And as a manager, as an organization, you need to be able to talk about these changes and how they should manifest into day to day. Maybe people should spend their time in a different way. Maybe they should spend more time mentoring, less time writing code. And maybe like the managers need to acquire new proficiencies. Like today we spend resources and time on manager training. It wasn't the case 2 years ago. So I'm a big believer of ongoing growth rather than each quarter let's stop for for a week and learn a new thing. You should always be learning, and that makes it natural, and that really makes it um, um, aligned with the growth of the organization. I think for us, like just to make it more like focused on the bigger challenges that hyper growth companies go through, like the challenge is that you're so focused on delivery, and teams are mostly small. It's really hard to onboard new talent while you're focused on delivering new features to customers. So one of the challenges is how do you provide the tools and the mentorship and the focus for those who recently joined while not distracting the organization from shipping value to production? That's a big question, and there are a lot of different answers.
Well,
Today,
we at Wilco certainly have a
I
specific
know.
answer for that, but we're not gonna self-plug ourselves too hard on this.
Yeah, so Wilco is a great option. I can say that. Um, but also, I think at some phases of our growth, we had dedicated people who were just focused on onboarding junior talent because it takes a lot of effort. And if you don't invest that effort, um, you're going to have trouble acclimating into the new environment. So I think different solutions fit different type of organizations depending on how much bandwidth you have for that onboarding process.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. And then, a part of helping them navigate the new organization and helping them grow and helping them develop, there's also another aspect to it, which is retaining them. And obviously, the more you invest in their growth, the easier it is to retain them, but that's not enough, right? There are other things you need to do to retain talent as the company grows. What are some of the tricks you have up your sleeve?
I think retention is the one thing that you shouldn't be tricking your way to.
Trick doesn't have to be a negative thing.
I know. I know. I wasn't saying it negatively. I think the reason I'm saying it because retention is about relationships. And, a company is not a family, like it's been talked about a lot. Like, and it shouldn't be a family, but it should be a place where you create strong bonds. And when you think about what makes a person stay with a company for a long period of time, and long is subjective, like in the Valley, it would be 2 years, I guess. Like that's really long. We just recently celebrated the anniversary of one of our principal engineers. Mark was celebrated 7 years at Lemonade. So long is relative. But when you think about the different considerations that keep people in your business, it would probably be a mix of their personal growth and personal development, the relationship with their manager, and unfortunately, there's also some tangible things like compensation. It's a thing. It's also important. Um, and when you think of personal growth, initially, when you're a small startup, personal growth doesn't really matter. Like you're a very small team, you have an existential threat, and you don't have any hierarchies, hopefully. You don't stress over levels and titles, hopefully, unless you've made some mistakes along the way. But as you grow and you start to have more defined roles and people spend more time within the organization, they naturally want to feel that they're making a progression. And if they're not progressing, they're going backwards. And you need to spend the time to articulate what it means to make that progress within your organization. And you start to build a career growth path, and you start to document that if you're doing a good job. And you make it your own. There are a lot of different ways. You can have 20 levels, you can have 2 levels, depending on your culture. But I think making sure that it's very clear and tying it into a performance management process could really make the difference between someone leaving your company and staying for years. The second part is about effective management. Like how do you create that bond with your employees that they feel that you really care about them? And if you don't spend time with your team, like how would they feel that you care about them? And it's really difficult. It's difficult if you have a lot of direct employees. It's difficult if the business is booming. It's even more difficult if the business is doing bad. But it should always be top of mind. And for great leaders, these interactions is exactly what makes them motivated and like really makes them feel happy to come to work every day. And the last part is about compensation. And I think startups are uniquely positioned to create compensation structures that encourage employees to stay for the long run and to feel true owners of the company. When you give employees equity, they literally own a part of the company. And if the business grow, they benefit from it. Now, there are a lot of situations like the odd world that we live in, like where the market fluctuates and it doesn't necessarily relate to the performance of the company or the performance of individual employees. But still, I think you should reevaluate on a yearly basis how do you recognize the contribution that everyone has. A part of that recognition would be dollars or equity, but other is just saying a nice word personally or in front of the team. So these are all the things these are the tricks, like you call them, that I look for.
It's a master response. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Before we see if there are any questions, perhaps from our audience, there is one last question I want to ask you. So, what would Erez of 3 years ago want to know, or what would you like to teach Erez from 3 years ago that you know now, and think he should have known?
Well, that's a difficult one, but I think I have an answer. I think I know. So first of all, I thought I knew what I was going into, but I didn't, because each company is very different, and I never experienced this type of growth. And I think when you join a unique organization that really wants to make a difference, they do things differently. And you need to spend the time and understand the culture and the nuances. And for me, it was the first time when I joined a complete team that didn't have any person that I personally hired. They weren't my people. They were someone else's people. So the challenge for me was to not have the expectations from all of the leaders and the individual contributors in the team to act like based on the expectations that I had in past companies, but to actually spend the time and understand, like, maybe I was doing things wrong. Like, maybe I didn't have the accurate expectations from people within the team. Maybe my communication standard is different from the way people communicate at Lemonade. It's not better or worse. It's just different. And it took me a while in order to really align myself, like, with the way people work, and also to truly understand what they need from me as a leader. And I learned a lot, and that's great. I think that's why that's another reason to come to work, other than the relationships that you create.
We're all continuously developing. This is great, and I can also relate to that. When I joined WeWork at first, I took over a team, and for the first time, this was a team where first of all, I didn't hire anyone, but I also didn't grow from the inside. So, in all of my previous places, this was either of those. And initially, I thought to myself, all right, there's already a team in place. I don't have to build from scratch. This is going to be easier. But turns out it's actually way harder when you're joining a new team. And like you said, the expectations might be different. And some of it is things that they're right and you're wrong, and you're still not getting the company and its culture. And some of it are things that, you should actually bring in from your experience, and they don't know yet. And it's a really tricky balance, and you have to figure out for yourself, and be humble enough to recognize when they're both humble enough and confident enough to recognize when the right moment is to put your foot down and insist, even when everyone is disagreeing with you, and when is the right moment to say, you know what, actually, you're right. This has been really great. Do we have any questions from the audience? I'm always clueless as to what the right mechanism to do that on Twitter Spaces, but I guess people can put up emojis if they have a question, and that way we can give them speaking permissions.
Yeah. If you have any question, just click on the you have in the emoji section. You just raise your hand emoji there. You can just click on it, and I will add you up to ask a question.
So if you have any questions for Erez, feel free to raise your hand virtually or metaphorically. And if not, I will say this has been a real pleasure. I certainly have learned a lot, and I hope that everyone who's listening in also picked a few things up. Thank you so much, Erez. It's been a real pleasure. And hope we'll get to do this again soon sometime.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, On and Ez. This was like really, really insightful, and I hope every single person here also learned a thing or two. And also, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I want to invite all of you to check out Wilco by visiting trywilco.com, play a quest or play multiple quests, and finally, don't forget to refer it to a friend if you found it useful. See you all next time, and yeah, the next episode will be really better. Thank you, Erez, and thank you, On, and thank you, everyone, for listening in.